All right, last time then, we had quite a bit of material last time, going in and finishing up our consumption shifters. And then we also went through all the ones that will shift the investment function part of aggregate demand in one direction or the other. And so now we've got everything with the money supply, positive relationship. We have government spending, which is a positive relationship. We had 4 shifters for each of the consumption and the investment function. So we've got quite a few things going on there. And so let's go ahead and end the shifter part of it with going in and talking about our foreign sector, which is going to be X minus M. Now, actually, when you go in and you look at the general theory, Keynes didn't actually spend a whole lot of time on the foreign sector, but you got to remember the book was written back in the 1930s. So actually, there wasn't much of a foreign sector that was going on back then. But now when you go in and you start to look at how much the foreign sector plays in our overall economy, it's getting larger as we go. I mean, we're truly in a globalized economy now. It used to be that we were kind of an island universe, if you will. Whatever happened overseas really didn't affect a lot of what was going on in these other sectors. But now it does. And so we have to pay a lot more attention to what is going on in the foreign sector of the economy. Now, I will also tell you, actually, and I believe I mentioned this a while back when we started talking about X minus M, if you change your major to economics, there's an entire semester course devoted to just X minus M. I mean, it is a huge deal because you go in, you talk about trade agreements, you talk about the changing currency values, right, and how that plays out, and antitrust and all this other stuff that goes on between countries. It gets to be really, really deep, really, really quickly. And so we don't want to go that deep, but I just want to give you a flavor of the idea of how changes that are going on in other countries are actually going to be affecting directly our economy. And that gives you hopefully a little bit better understanding of some policies that go on and why some of these foreign relations are actually so important. So actually, I'm only going to concentrate on 2 of the many, many things that are out there. I'm only going to concentrate on 2 of those shifters. And the first one is going to be what I call national incomes. And notice I have the S on this. That's not national income, because we know when we go in and, if our incomes and wealth and whatnot is going up, we're going out and we're spending that money in the overall economy, right, through our consumption expenditures. But as it turns out, as other countries' incomes are changing, that's going to go in and change our aggregate demand based on X minus M factors. Right, so in other words, let's say ceteris paribus, right, all else held constant, CP, ceteris paribus. Let's say as U.S. incomes rise. Ceteris paribus as U.S. incomes rise. Another way, if you want to think about it this way, the U.S. economy is doing well. All right, so if our economy is doing well, unemployment is down, people are working, they're earning more money, they're spending more money, right? All right, but here's the deal. If you go in and you start looking at this from the X minus M point of view, then that means that part of the extra spending that is going on is going to be on imported goods. So we are going to be buying more goods from countries and then bringing them into the United States. Okay, but now I want you to think about this for just a second. If you go in and you look at X minus M, if X is remaining constant, but this term is going up, M is going up. So is this term becoming more positive or more negative?
negative.
All right, it's becoming more negative. So that means then that the trade deficit is increasing. Now remember, when we go back and we start looking at back when we were measuring gross domestic product, so we said that if X minus M, if that is a negative number, it's a trade deficit. And if X minus M is a positive number, is a trade surplus, right? So that means then, as that M is increasing relative to X, this term is becoming more negative, which means the trade deficit is getting larger. And thus we know if the trade deficit is getting larger, there is going to be a decline in aggregate demand. That puts a drag on the economy because remember, from gross domestic product, C plus IG plus G plus X minus M, right? Remember, if this term is negative, then you subtract it out of the rest of this, right? So what's happening then is as the trade deficit goes up, that actually decreases aggregate demand and pulls this aggregate demand curve back into the left. All right, does everybody see where I'm going with that? All right, but here's the thing. If you look at this for just a second, maybe the logic that I just gave you sounded good, but if you look at what I've spelled out here, what sounds wrong about that? Because everything I told you is true, right? But what looks wrong about this?
Wouldn't X be going up too?
Not necessarily, because we're just talking about, now ceteris paribus, our incomes. So since we don't buy our own exports, somebody else does. So the export component would be remaining the same. We're only buying the goods that were produced somewhere else and coming into the country. Okay, so we'll deal with X here in just a moment.
Is it true that an increase in the trade deficit would decrease aggregate demand?
Yes, because that's going in, if you look at the gross domestic product component that I just showed you, the larger that negative gets, gross domestic product is declining. All else held constant, right? Just that part of it. But again, look what I just wrote here. US incomes are rising, trade deficit goes up, aggregate demand goes down. What's a little backwards about all of that?
The US income is rising, yet the aggregate demand curve is decreasing.
Every other time that we have gone in and said, hey, the US economy is doing well, what's happening to aggregate demand?
Goes up.
It's always going up. That aggregate demand curve is always going in this direction. Now I'm telling you that as the US economy is doing well, that now we've got this drag on aggregate demand that is over here. I want you to think about it in terms of it's a braking effect on aggregate demand. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this, just because the trade deficit goes up doesn't necessarily mean the aggregate demand curve will necessarily pull to the left. But what I am saying is there's a negative aspect to it. And that negative aspect happens to be that trade deficit. So the last time, and by the way, this is not always necessarily a negative thing. People see it as a negative thing, but not necessarily, depends on the economic times that you're in. Back in the 1990s, when we went in, we have a super hot economy, the hottest economy that we've seen since then. Gross domestic product increasing by about 6% per year, right? And so it was a very, very hot time. And so if you were just relying on G, C, and I sub G, that aggregate demand curve would have been flying out and to the right. And we would have had ourselves in a massive inflationary state in a very short period of time. But at the same time that this was all increasing, we were buying imported goods, and that imported goods was raising the trade deficit by a very large amount, and thus putting a braking effect on the economy. So instead of the aggregate demand curve doing this, the aggregate demand curve did this, right? It still increased, but it increased at a slower rate. but yet it did increase at a slower rate because that trade deficit was actually increasing. All right, so again, it's an odd thing to look at, but that's the negative effect that actually comes from the trade deficit itself. Good. Questions? Is everybody okay with that? Now, if you also look at it the other way, ceteris paribus, as foreign incomes rise. So we're looking out at these other countries, and those other countries are doing well. So foreign economies are doing well. All right. So if they're doing well, they're producing, their unemployment rates are down, they're getting money, they're spending money. Okay. But part of their spending is going to be on goods that were produced in the United States and sold to them, which means that our export component is going up. Remember, in this class, when we're talking about imports and exports, we're always talking about it from the United States point of view, right? By the way, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to confuse anybody, but this, when you start, making X minus M relative from us to other countries, right, and so on, then all of a sudden your eyes get crossed pretty fast, right? You get confused very, very quickly. So when we say in this term, it's an export, it's a U.S. export, import is a U.S. import. So when their economies are doing well, they're spending money and they're buying our goods that we're producing and shipping over to their countries. Okay, so if X is going up relative to M, is this entire term becoming more positive or more negative?
Positive.
More positive, which means the trade deficit, CIT, will be, it won't be going up as fast, right, as it was before. Right? I don't want to necessarily say it's declining, but it's not going up as fast as it was before. And thus, because there's a braking effect on the trade deficit, then that's like going in and taking your foot off of the brake of the U.S. economy and allowing it to expand just a little bit quicker. So this goes in and shows us that we want the rest of the world economy to be doing well. Because if they are, they're spending money. Part of that spending is on our goods that we're producing and selling to them. And that can only be a positive thing for the U.S. economy. Okay, now there's one other one that I do want to do that we're actually seeing today. And that is, let's say, ceteris paribus, as foreign, R-E-I-G-N, as foreign incomes decline. As foreign incomes decline. So if their economies are not doing well, all right, then that means if you look over here at X minus M, and by the way, I made the statement that we're kind of seeing this happen today. Why would we see foreign economies not be doing well in this time period? Because of the whole COVID thing, right? Got lockdowns that are still over in Europe and all over the place, right? I think the UK is still locked down. Other different places in the world are still locked down. So their economies are not doing well, and unemployment is high, and they're not spending. But unfortunately, some of that non-spending is going to be on U.S. goods. So they're not buying as many goods from us as they used to be. So exports from our country are going down. All right. So if X is going down relative to M, is this term becoming more positive or more negative? All right. So the trade deficit will be increasing. And of course, we know if the trade deficit goes up, that goes in and puts the brakes again on the US economy because we are not selling as many goods as we used to these other countries, and our trade deficit is showing that. Okay, so this goes in, and this clearly shows us that there is now a causal link that we now have that probably 25 years ago we didn't have. You know, you could kind of say this, there was a little bit of an effect, but you could have the rest of the world go into a recession. You could have Europe go into a recession and we would never feel it, right? Or barely feel it. But that's not the case now. When you have Japan go in and have a natural disaster like they did a few years ago with the tsunami, now that when you go in and you have the COVID crisis like we do right now, our economy feels that sort of thing actually happening. So there's a direct causal link between the two. Okay, so there's one place we want to look at, and that's just if these economies are doing well or not doing well, how is that going to affect us? Okay, very good. Now, the second one I'm going to put as the relative prices of imports and exports. Relative prices of imports and exports. Now, what that means is we're going in and we're looking at the prices of goods coming into the United States versus the prices of the same goods that are produced here and are being sold overseas. Okay, now the only one that I am going to deal with is the only one that really happens in today's terms, and that is where we have higher domestic prices. Higher domestic prices. So in other words, the goods that are produced here are actually going to be a higher price than the goods that are produced somewhere else and actually sold in the United States. Okay, so let's go in for a moment. Let's kind of draw this out and see how this works. So let's say we have the United States that is here, and we have Japan that is over here. Okay, if the good originates in the United States and is sold in Japan, a U.S. import or export? All right, so that's a U.S. export, very good. So we'll put that down here. If the good originates in Japan and is sold in the United States, then that makes it a U.S. import. Okay, now let's assume for the moment that we go in and we have an automobile that, and let's just call it a Chevrolet, and the car can be made in either the United States or in Japan. And for the sake of argument, let's say it's a comparable car in size, gas mileage, performance, amenities, right, what have you. It's not that I want us to be buying on. It is the price itself. So the car itself essentially is the same car. But if that car is actually produced and sold in the United States, let's say that car can be produced and sold for $30,000. So that's its price here. Or the car can be produced and sold in Japan for, let's say, $25,000. So there's your higher domestic prices. So the price is higher here than it is in Japan. Okay, now let's take a look at this for a moment. If we are in the United States, we could go down to the local General Motors dealer and we could buy that car for $30,000. Or we could walk right across the street to the Toyota dealer and buy a comparable automobile for only $25,000, right? Probably which one is the United States consumer going to go with? You know, if it's the same car, our money means as much to us as anything else, we'll buy the cheaper good. So what does that mean for imports coming into the United States? They increase. So there's going to be an increase of those cheaper vehicles coming into the United States. Okay, now I'm going to take this one further. A lot of books will stop at that particular point. I want to go across and see how Japan is going to be reacting to this. Because the Japanese can go to their local Toyota dealer and buy that car for $25,000, or they can walk across the street and go to a General Motors dealership and buy the same car for $30,000. Well, which one are they going to buy? They're going to buy their own Toyota. And so what happens to the General Motors products that are going to be flowing into Japan? They'll be decreasing. All right. So does everybody see that? Are we good with that aspect of it? Okay. Now, how is this going to end up affecting the trade deficit itself? All right. Let's go in and let's have a place to start. And let's say that right now we have $5 billion of exports, $10 billion of imports. So right now our trade deficit is $5 billion. Okay. According to this right here, so this is our X and our M. According to this, our X's, our exports are going to be going down. So let's say they go from 5 down to $4 billion. According to this, our imports are going to be rising. So let's say they rise from 10 up to $11 billion. All right, so what's 4 minus 11? -7. All right, now has the trade deficit increased or decreased? It's increased. That number has become more negative. So the trade deficit has increased. And we know when the trade deficit increases, that puts a drag on aggregate demand. And there's a braking effect or a pulling effect back into the left of the aggregate demand curve. So this is why people are worried about the cheaper foreign goods, right? Because I would, and the reason I do both of these is there's a double whammy. A lot of people will go in and talk about just the imports or just the exports, but I want you to notice both of these are actually moving in not the preferred direction for the United States. That's why I say we get the double whammy. Our exports are going down, which we know is a bad thing, and we're buying more foreign goods. That just adds to the problem, and that goes in and actually exacerbates the trade deficit itself. All right, so what ends up happening, and I don't want you to write this down, but I just want you to understand where this comes from. Let's say, and in fact, we had this situation back in about the latter, probably 1990s or so, where we go in, and if you look at, let's say, the agricultural situation, where we had tractors, right? They were being traded between countries. And actually, specifically, we had this going on between Japan and the United States. So we actually had, let's say, John Deere, right, that was producing a tractor here. And then over in Japan, does anybody know what their tractor is? There's another one, it's the orange one. No? No? No, that's the steel is the chainsaw. Actually, that's a German-made product. Right, you see them all over the place. Yeah, Kubota. Right, yeah, there you go. So K-A-B-O-T-A, right? The Kubota tractor. It's made in Japan. So what was happening back in the early to mid 1990s was you could go in and you could buy a brand new John Deere tractor for about $30,000. Let's say one for home, like a 35 horsepower, right? Something like that. You could go in and you could buy the same Kubota tractor for about $23,000, right? There was a sizable price difference between the two. And what ended up happening is that the imports of Kubotas were just streaming into the United States. And the export of John Deere, it started to trickle, right? Because why should the foreign nations, particularly Japan, go out and buy on a name brand when if you go in and you look at the quality of the items, actually there's some people that say Kubota is a better tractor, right? So why not go out And even if it doesn't have as many amenities as the John Deere and doesn't have the green paint on it, for that amount of money difference, you can live with some things, right? I mean, if that price difference is enough, people are going to buy on price. They're not going to buy on all those other things. So what ends up happening, and actually what ended up happening in the tractor market, was that, and it wasn't only John Deere that was having this problem. Massey Ferguson, what's another one? White, which was Ford. They went in, they started having the problem as well. Kubota tractors were just streaming into the United States. So the reason why the government goes in and puts taxes and tariffs on commodities is to try to level out this price difference. And so what the United States did was go in and they added a tariff to the Kubota tractors, such that it brought the price of these Kubota tractors very, very close to being competitive with what was going on in the US tractor market. And so once that happens, this net flow ceases because of the price differential. So then you go out and people aren't buying on the price, they go out and then they buy on the amenities of the tractor, right? What sort of implements can you get for it? What horsepower is it, right? All those other things. Now for $1,000 difference, I want the one that's going to last the longest and will do the most. It's not just the price difference. So that's why the US government will go in sometimes like this and add these taxes and tariffs to go in and level those price differences out. Now, the question is, okay, well, why don't we do that to everything that goes in and has this sort of price differential? Let's just start slapping taxes and tariffs on everything. Any idea why not? Because it's not a good idea. Sorry?
Foreign action.
Yeah, what's going to end up happening is if we go in and we mess with the tractor market, then maybe Japan will come back in and say, all right, we're going to start taxing fruit, right, that is coming into our nation. So now the fruit producers or apple producers are being hurt by this entire thing because the tractors couldn't keep their prices down, right, and couldn't keep their prices under control. And so you get into a lot of this, it's called a trade war, basically is what it is. You jack something up, they'll jack something up, then we retaliate, then they retaliate, and then all of a sudden the free market as it is, just simply goes away. And if you're going in and you're arguing for less government intervention, there is not the way to do it. That is not the way to do it. So actually a lot of people have said, hey, you know what? Maybe John Deere and some of these other tractor companies need to get their prices under control or need to build a lot better product than what they're building right now and compete with your competitors on a level playing field, right? And so not have the government go in and fight your battles for you. But anyway, this is something else that you get into when you start talking about these courses on X minus L. Okay, so there you go. There's your relative prices of imports and exports. Very good. Questions? I'm not going to do the other one. I mean, there is the situation where you actually have higher foreign prices.